been through this 1,000 times. My future reviews what's on my mind. We've talked about. I thought I squashed. She broke my heart in two, and I hope that it would be mended by you. But what I'm getting is not what I was expecting. So why should I try a thing that I'm out of my mind to deal with this thing one more time. I think I'm gonna lie, then why should I? And why should I try? To be good to you.
All right. Good morning, beautiful people. Happy Friday. I'm in the house. It's raining in the Elm City. And if you just tuned in around 9 o'clock, you know it's time for Lovebabz Love Talk. I'm Babz Rawls Ivy. And guess who is back in the house? My spiritual crush, Enroue Halfkenny.
Good morning. Good morning.
How
Happy
are
spring.
you?
I'm
Happy
doing
spring.
Well. I'm doing well.
I know. We walked in together this morning
No.
celebrating the rain.
Yes.
Well, no,
Though
you
I
were,
think I was
no, you were
a little bit more
celebrating the
than
rain.
you.
You was checking me.
Yes.
Like
We
that.
need the rain.
Need
That's
the
why
rain.
we're getting the green
Yes.
that we love. We've been longing for.
See how God
for the
works?
season.
Make sure He puts people in your path to remind you of the goodness of things.
Yes.
How are you
Yes.
since the last time I saw you? Because I saw up on Facebook that you've got an event coming up.
Yes. There's a burst of activity. So Tuesday, this Tuesday at 495 Blake Street in the Elm City Montessori School,
Mm-hmm.
between the hours of 6 and 8 p.m. I'll be giving a introduction to Yoruba Orisha worship and practice talk, event, class thing.
I love it.
Haven't quite decided what last word is, so it's
Mhm.
basically a gathering, and I'll be talking. So for that period of time, giving some real structural foundation and shape to what this practice is,
Mhm.
touching upon many of the things I've been talking about with you, and then really the last half is really going to be answering questions that people have.
Okay.
So really be able to get specific to what people's needs are, versus me just giving a lecture.
Okay. And then there's a component like you might go to the river. You might you might
yes.
go do something.
Yeah, so for those who are interested, between 5:30 and about 5:50, I'll just be leading some simple prayers. So in that spot at 495 Blake Street, it's at West River, runs right past, and it's at the base of West Rock. It's actually a place that I've done a lot of healing work, both just individually going to, as well as with other people, one-on-one, and also in some groups doing some healing work in nature. And so between 5:30 and 5:50, I'll just be making some prayers and some offerings. People don't have to bring anything. It's simple. It's not mandatory. So it's just if that's something you want to participate in, or just kind of see a component of what that practice looks like, and to feel it. That'll happen before the kind of speaking lecture part, which will be indoors. And obviously it's weather permitting, since it's outside.
And
And
is
then
it free? Open to the
it
public?
is free and open to the public. There will be some snack foods there. Yeah, and we'll see. I mean, it's something that people have been asking about.
Are you
something
kidding?
That I've been
Clamoring.
I've been alluding to for a while. And so to have the space, particularly there, is a real blessing. So real thanks to Elm City Montessori and Amelia Allen Sherwood, and for kind of spearheading that component, that connection there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we get to kind of do this work in community with people, and really about bringing your thoughts and your questions,
Mm-hmm.
because this is also about what's relevant. This
Mm-hmm.
isn't just kind of a theory. This isn't a kind of a talking point. And my approach, my hope is to really share with you what this practice has meant for me and what it continues to mean for me.
Mm-hmm.
So this balance, for me, it's this balance of sharing that while obviously providing some real concrete information, and then with people's questions, really being able to address that particular place that they want to have addressed and learn about.
Are you amazed at how interested people are? Because the time seems to be ripe for this kind of conversation. You know, at least I get it. I see it
Mhm.
with people that they, you know, this is what I've noticed, that once people start delving into their history of people, of Black people in this country and where they came from,
Mhm.
they naturally want to know about religious practices or spiritual practices and how people sustain themselves and move themselves.
Mhm.
Like that seems like a natural progression of thought and movement to me, you know.
Yeah.
But not knowing like where to go, and not sort of feeling like it's witchcraft. That kind of thing.
Well, I mean, as we've touched upon before, there's a lot of unlearning. But which has to happen anyway. Like if we're trying to be free, then right, there's the recognition of like where's the limitations, where's the bondage, where's the no coming from, and then we can also kind of see that, and then see where it is we want to grow, because this isn't just around kind of undoing a thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's really about what is the life of something else.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes as we connect to that, we don't have to unlearn so much, right? It's like our yes, right? So like that yes to connection opens things up, and even brings us to a kind of a vulnerable place in our heart and in community that kind of trying to undo something wouldn't necessarily do that with.
Mm-hmm.
And so whether it's connecting to, and so explicitly, right, there's a lot of undoing of kind of colonial mentality, what assimilation is, what white supremacy is, kind of capitalism, patriarchy,
Mm-hmm.
kind of all of these systems that can be really oppressive, both internally and individually and relationally and systemically. There's like, for example, for many people, and for many people in the Black community, kind of Blackness and richness of culture stops at enslavement, right? So it's primarily a connection through like what has happened either during or just after slavery as an institution, and a richness that's there. And so yes, there's a richness there, and there's thousands of years of richness and personhood, right? Because it's really about what does it mean to be a human, and can we ask the big questions like what is the meaning of my life and what's my purpose? But like when you're in a crisis, our brains can't really grasp those things, right? We're dealing with the very real crises of oppression, of poverty, of violence. So it's much more challenging to think about meaning and purpose while your basic needs are not being met. And so we actually have a rich history of having more of those needs met. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Not that life was perfect, but an ability and a capacity to also think about meaning and purpose, and our relationship with people and communities, animals, nature, seen and unseen forces, our ancestors, the Orisha, however we want to connect with God and the divine. And we had ways of doing that, and those were actively and depending on where people land in the diaspora, those were actively assaulted as embedded traditions. And over time, many of those explicit things get lost, though there may be an undercurrent of understanding of, oh, this is how I want to connect with people or the land or God or nature or my experience of the divine. In ways that, like in this country, rhythm, certainly through African peoples continued, even though the drum as an explicit instrument was forbidden.
Yes.
In terms of this part, in terms of the North America. Now in the Caribbean, that was different, and so you have a very different way that kind of Africanism survived. But that's an example of like some explicit things are lost, even though how people live in that, how people then sing in that, how people play other instruments with that same kind of sensibility continues. But some of the explicit practices are eliminated and then forgotten, and then actually seen as internalized as negative. So there are ways that really connecting to traditional indigenous culture and practices is still the other because of the lens that we have internalized here in this country. And so this is an opportunity. And also I want to really be clear, like this, so I'm getting airtime, which is beautiful. There's a lot more kind of happening in popular culture, but these are ways and traditions that have existed underground since before the institutions of slavery. Well,
and so
sorry,
when you
it
say
was above
underground
ground there, but
okay.
underground since the institutions of
I
slavery.
see what you mean, yes.
Before they were really allowed institutions of religious and cultural practices.
And accepted, right? Allowed, accepted.
Well, it was the way people lived. So it's not just kind of allowed and accepted. Like you wouldn't say we allow and accept that we can go to the corner store, right? We do that. It's there, right? And so in the same way, these were institutions and still are. I mean, they still exist, even though there's been assaults that also happen in indigenous communities, because you have kind of global forces at work to try to undo indigenous communities, connections to resources and land, as well as assaults from depending on the place. So among the Yoruba or many places in West Africa, right, there's kind of more of a religious cultural assault from like Islam and Christianity to really destroy indigenous traditions. There's some coexisting that happens, but there's some also real explicit, like, no, we're going to destroy these icons, these places of worship, these ways of thinking, and really demonize them. So the kind of, before that, these were institutions that this is just how people lived. And then in terms of being underground, so my particular practice is, my training is in a more traditional Yoruba, West African Orisha practice. So my elders who taught me kind of how to do things were either Yoruba people or people who were trained by Yoruba or kind of West African Orisha practitioners. So some of them are in Benin, and most of them are Yoruba people. And so, but that is a particular lens even of Orisha practice. There are many people who practice, who are Orisha worshipers, who have come through practices that have developed in the diaspora. So as a picture, you can imagine, right? So now we have, or before slavery, Yoruba traditional religion and culture, right? That existed among the Yoruba people. Institution of slavery happens. People are then spread throughout the diaspora. So depending on where they landed, you have a mixture of who those particular practitioners were, like what their knowledge base was, because these are oral traditions, right? Passed on people to people. What other African peoples were there because of slavery, what indigenous peoples and practices were there, and Catholicism. So that blend, depending on the place and depending on then how the institutions of slavery impacted people, you then had different kind of outgrowths of like a diasporic Orisha practice. What that means is, like in Brazil, you have Candomblé, you have Umbanda, and there are kind of various other ones. I mean, I don't know all of the ways that these have been landed in practice, but that's some in Brazil. In Haiti, you have Vodun, so that's a blend of, there's a little bit more from Congo, but then you have a particular blend of how they've mixed together African practices, indigenous practices, and understandings, and Catholicism. In Cuba, you have Lucumi, Santeria, and then also throughout kind of the Latinx communities, you also have Espiritismo. You have other ways that people have kind of stay connected to these nature-based practices as well as these indigenous ways of thinking. So depending again where it lands, what that particular blend is, you then get a different denomination / offshoot tradition, right? And so since then, you have these really rich traditions of like people in the Lukumi community, which then impacted probably in the, I think the 40s and 50s. I'm not a huge historian in terms of like how these have landed through here, but how in the African American communities, really through Cuba and through Latinx communities, then kind of bring us as African heritage people back to Africa. But initially it was through kind of Lukumi or through like voodoo in New Orleans, which also connected to Haiti, or people learning from even places in Brazil, kind of learning these ways and this expression and connection to the Orisha through these kind of diasporic communities and practices. And more recently, so like my first teachers, and so like they had some connections. There was an elder who passed away, Chief Bay in New York, musician, historian, teacher, both in and outside of the Orisha community, was someone who was really connected to African music, really played with Olatunji, and so really kind of made these connections and pride in Orisha and African spiritual practices kind of alive and held them. And so my first teachers, Oshunkemi and Shangoyemi, learned from him also. And while their practices were a little bit more traditional, because their elders were really from West Africa directly, or he had some elders there also, but like in terms of practices, he was more grounded in a African American Lukumi practice, kind of an more Africanized practice in that way. They kind of had him as a mentor and an elder, even as their primary teachers and spiritual mentors were in a different continent. And so this is some of the ways that like there's been more of an infusion of kind of more traditional ways and theology and understanding and practice from West Africa versus through Cuba or Brazil or Trinidad or some of these places in the diaspora. So that's all to say, kind of the lens that I approach kind of my personal practices is different than people who are practicing through Lukumi, people who are practicing from Candomblé, Vodun, Santeria, Shango Baptist. So similarly, in many other religions, there are kind of different denominations or different
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Ways of not necessarily orthodoxy, because within each one, there's a level of orthodoxy. Right? Within Candomblé, within Lukumi, there's an orthodoxy. But there's real structure and form. And I say this because part of the ways that in this culture we look at African or indigenous practices is as if people just kind of get to do what they want. I just feel
That's a good point.
I just feel this way. And like, you know, I feel called to do this, or I must have been a so-and-so in a past life, or I'm just kind of put some things together. And it's not to say that people don't have a right to like follow really their intuition and follow these things that feel good. And it's important to understand that there are also traditions, practices, structure, really solid containers, and lineage that exist. And you know, so as a babalawo in the Yoruba Orisha practice, there are certain things I do and don't do, in the same way that a priest in a branch of this religion, or a rabbi in a branch of this religion, or an imam in a branch of this aspect of their tradition has those things. Right? You wouldn't go to one and just say, oh, well, I just want to kind of do something. Can you do this for me? It's like, well, no, that's actually not my practice. Right? You don't go to in the same way with any other profession, right? You don't go to the mechanic and like, okay, you know, I want this. I use this example all the time. Like, I want this sandwich. It's like, well, That's not what I do.
I don't make sandwiches here.
Well, like I
But
can make
you
them,
need-
like because I make sandwiches for myself. But like
Do you need your breaks done? I'm better
Right.
at that.
Right. And so just to have some sense, some understanding, both. I think one reason I wanted to say that is, you know, the things that I'm sharing, like these are not the kind of definitive, authoritative, this is the thing for all Orisha practitioners everywhere all the time.
That's a good point.
Because that's something that can happen a lot in our cultures. Like, oh, you're the expert. That is the way, right? For all people, all times, that is the way. And in indigenous practices, there are containers and there are ways, and like how we find our way in that is important.
Yeah, this is just one avenue.
Yeah.
And come and explore and learn, and be open, and
and there's things that are, this is the way of this practice, and like how we find that and what that then means to us is important. I was talking to somebody around the difference between like intuition and instinct. Because there are many people who in like a skillful way, right? So they've kind of done a lot of spiritual work and a lot of development. Their intuition is really strong, and they can really like, oh, like this feels right. I don't know why, but I trust that, and I'm going to do this thing. And so there's real value in that, and like cultivating a way. And in some ways, we can look at that. And one way I understand it is like, I spoke a little bit before last time about our Ori, right? Our spiritual heads connected to our destiny. It's like our own Orisha. It's our own divinity. And to me, in some ways, our intuition is like a real clarity of connection with that, right? Connection with what's really in line with our purpose. So is it best for me to like go to this party, or is it best for me to like go? So when I was younger and in my spiritual development, I literally had these kind of conversations. So am I going to go to this like party, this like potluck, and I love the people there. It'll be nice. It'll be fun. Or do I like stay home and like sit in front of my altar for like 3 hours? And like, I didn't know what that meant. But it was like, and I don't know what that direction is, but I know what the party's going to be. I don't know what this other way is going to be. And there was a commitment for me moving and developing in this other way. So that was the kind of like, oh, so let me try this other way. It's easy to do this other thing. I don't know where this like spiritual development is going to lead me. Let me try it. Let me try to.
And that's how you build your spiritual muscle, I
Right.
think,
Yes.
at least from my spiritual direction practice. Yes. That the more that you learn to listen to your intuitive self, the stronger it becomes in guiding you through the harder things when they arrive.
Yes. Now, the subtlety in that, or the dance in that, is that we don't always think clearly, right? The things that emerge are not actually always the kind of things that lead us to growth. Sometimes the things that come up are the things that are really about withdrawing and protecting. And so that's some of the difference between like our intuition and our instinct. And so for a long time, I got myself in, had my emotional crisis and was like in the kind of bottom of my bottom, and all kinds of things were going on. And like, I was like, oh, well, my thoughts got me there. Right. So I can't just say, I'm just going to trust my thoughts to like get me out.
No.
I actually need to learn. I need to listen differently. I need to get some other information. I need some reality checking.
Because your intuitive voice is a lot different than your emotional voice.
Yeah, well, that's why I've come to say like this instinctual, right? So the instinctual is really like this like fight or flight, this, like, very protective, and like sometimes like I need to like hunker down and not do. But if I'm really trying to stretch and to grow, I need to find new ways of doing that that are also safe, but challenge my kind of instinctual thinking, because the instinctual thinking may have gotten me through a crisis, but if that crisis is over and I'm still living that way, I can't grow anymore. Because growth is risk, right? We see these tender shoots coming up, right? They're like, wind comes by and it's going to knock them down, right? There's tenderness in that, right? In that kind of new growth, and there's vulnerability growing into a place.
And it's easy to shut it down, to say, you know what?
Right.
I don't.
Too much.
Yeah, it's too
That's
much. I don't know what this is.
Right.
I can't. No, I'm gonna go back to what I know.
Exactly.
Because that has served me, and it may not be serving you, but you know it.
Right.
And it's a habit. This is what I do.
Right. And so that piece is how to develop new habits. And so, so for example, like in kind of being on this spiritual path, I had to learn new habits.
Yes.
And I had to like get outside of some of my comfort zone and
Yes.
stretch. And some of that I kind of knew, because if I could at least respond to, so if my habit is to turn left, if I could slow down my awareness to like, oh, I'm turning away from the right. I wonder what there is there, instead of just going to the left. But that also takes development and awareness.
It does.
But I also want to say though that to trust when that is, I think there's a piece of our health, which is also our system desires it. And so these kind of instincts, it's not just like, well, how do I like figure out how to have that awareness? Like, I think for many of us, and certainly for me, there was these moments where it was happening and I then started fighting it. So my habit was then fighting the like, look over here.
Yeah.
And I was like, nah, yeah. And so literally I had this phrase, which I tell people about all the time. This I know, but. Right? So yeah, I know I should do that, but I'm going to do this other thing. And I caught myself literally saying that to myself. I said, wait a minute. So in this moment, I'm saying, I know that's best for me, but I'm going to do the thing that's not. So what if, as an experiment, what if I just put a period at the I know, period?
Yeah.
And just did that.
Yeah.
And that was, oh, I don't know if I can do that, or like, okay, that feels weird, or like it's uncomfortable, or other feelings come up, and like, okay, well, if I can trust, if I know that I have to listen differently, and this is, now I'm looking at that differently, maybe there's something there. I know the party, right? I don't know this other way. Yeah, I know it might be better for me to like sit and develop or explore this other thing, but I'm going to go to the party. What if I say, just, I know I want to try this other thing, and then pay attention to what happens.
Yeah.
Right. It's not just like, just do it. It's like, do it. How does it feel? What is the outcome? Is the outcome in a direction that, I'm trying to grow in? And if it is, okay, so what if I start doing that more? And that then becomes a new habit.
Yes. I like that. I always tell people, I know what's for me when it goes smoothly. When I am crashing up against the wall, that is the moment that I need to go in a different direction. Because if it's hard and I have to move heaven and earth to do it, then that's not what I should be doing. But when I turn around and go in a different direction, and it's like everything sort of lines up, the path rolls out, I was like, oh, okay, this is good. This is seamless. I'm not killing myself to try to force myself into whatever. And so I always take that message in everything. I'm like, how hard is this for me to do? Like, what is the challenge? And should I be doing this? Or should I be looking to see what other path there is before I try to force myself down this road?
That's so tricky though, because like in this tradition, like change is seen as like, that's the order of the day. Like life has changed, and we have to create the peace that we want. And we do that actually by making offerings, by making sacrifices, whether it's like literally taking the time. So I'm going to take the time to like sit here and do this spiritual work versus this
be at the party.
Because if I'm at the party, I'm then sacrificing those relationships in a certain way, or a certain element of them to build something else. And doing these things that are like, I also work with people on like trauma. And the thing about trauma, which is different than many other things, is as you get into it, it gets worse before it gets better. And so I only say that because like, so sometimes true. Like, it's not just about, oh, everything's lining up. It's like, oh, these things, and I thought I just put these away, and now this is up, and this is a mess, and I'm like confused and afraid again, and I thought I wasn't going to be. And that's why that's important to do with some support. But I think that's the complexity of, it is not just about the easy things, because like when habits make things easy. Like if you have a habit of doing something, it's easy to just go along with the habit. And it actually is effort and can be really disruptive for yourself and the people you love, right? If you're used to just saying yes to everybody all the time, and they're like, wow, this is killing me. I need to say no, right? What? That is disruptive. It's disruptive to ourselves. And the people are like, well, who are you now? Or like, now you're rejecting me. And like, that's disruptive. So I think, so this actually goes into this piece around like developing that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So how we develop this intuition, how we develop these tools, and so it's really with support. And so in this tradition, and because support comes in all kinds of ways, right? Human beings, our connection to the natural world, our connection to our ancestors, to the Orisha. That's how we get our support. And there are ways of then stepping out of our thinking to get that. And so one of the ways that we do that are through these various forms of like divination, things that we use to communicate to these forces. And so we have like our way of thinking, and like, so I think this is what I need to do. And then we ask, is this correct? Is this best for me? Is this in alignment with what I need to be doing in my health? And we might be feeling great and might get a no. No, that's not in alignment with actually what you need to do. And you need to, what's best for you is this other thing. Now, then it becomes this choice. Am I going to like deal with that rub, right? That like friction. Oh, can I give up? Can I even surrender to listening differently? Can I surrender to what I think I need or what I think I should do into something that's best for me?
Yeah.
And there are different systems of divination in this tradition, and it kind of depends on people's learning and training, and then kind of initiation into the religion, which is like a deeper form of connection, where you're receiving the ashe, the energy and the essence of these divinities. But even without that, there are ways of using. So traditionally, you would use obi, which are a type of kola nut, or people in the diaspora then start, because obi doesn't grow here. Coconuts, cowrie shells, things. And they're cast, and depending on the patterns of what kind of shows up or down, you get responses like this is a yes or a no, or this is like a qualifier. And so for me, as a part of my own development, when I was beginning in this tradition, I could like sit and say these prayers and make these offerings, and then I would ask, so like, is everything accepted? Am I doing what I need to be doing? And to get a really simple like yes or no was then a way that I could get this kind of other voice from these forces around what is going to lead me in the direction I'm really seeking. And that way I also get to kind of cultivate like, oh, how do I listen? Like, well, this really, so in time it's like, okay, this feels right. Oh, and yes, it's confirmed. Yes, that's right. And, for a lot of time it's like, oh, well, should I do this? No. Okay. Well, should I do that? No. I should do that? No. This? Yes. Oh, that means like, okay, I got to listen a little bit more in there, what that is. And there are different levels of like what those kind of divination systems are, and different ways that the traditional and sacred literature is then embodied in. So they get kind of more complicated or richer in the messages and assessments, and maybe, as I talked a little bit before about the sacred literature, kind of embodied in those, embedded in those are problems and solutions and ways that people need to behave, maybe physical problems that are present, spiritual problems that are present, emotional problems that are present, mental health problems that are present, and then the supports needed that will bring either the solution or how to navigate that whatever negativity there is. Because things happen. It doesn't mean that if you do walk these spiritual paths, nothing, quote, bad happens.
Oh, no.
But
no,
it
no,
may
no.
be that, you're given some support to navigate that better.
Yeah.
Right? As opposed to just being overwhelming and debilitating. It's like, okay, that's like the support we need just to live.
Because I always, when I was in spiritual direction class, we would always say, first you get the lesson, then you get the test.
Well, that's life, right? Life is a test.
First you get the lesson, and then you get the test, and then you'll keep getting the lesson. You'll keep getting the lesson until you pass the test, or or get through the test, and then you can move on to the then
there's another one.
The next one.
Then there's another layer, right? We're just peeling the onion. It's another layer. Another layer.
Yeah, it's just another layer, just another. Yes. So you're gonna do this, and what are your thoughts? Tell me how you're feeling about this. How timely does this feel to you?
Oh yeah, you did ask that question. Right? There was that question you asked. So I think that there's those two things happening. One, there does appear to be more kind of popular or expressed mainstream curiosity and desire I think what I wanted to say is like there's also been these lineages that have existed already.
Mm-hmm.
That is that the question, while more people might be having it, in some ways the answer and the practice is not new.
Right.
It's been here.
It's been yes.
It's been here. And it has survived in the diaspora and in West Africa since they landed. I mean, since they were developed, right? Since they either were developed there or since they landed here.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of one thing I just wanted to state is that like these are, well, some of the like, where can I find and what does this mean? When I was really searching for the first time, it was really important to find like a tradition and to find a lineage, because I knew I wasn't the first person actually to think of these things.
Mm-hmm.
And I also couldn't just rely on myself. I was like, well, how do I know I'm not just making something up and just pulling something together, which I think particularly in this country, in this culture of consuming, I like that, I want it.
Mm-hmm.
It can be really easy to kind of appropriate things.
Oh, I see it all the time.
It feels good.
See it in the yoga community. You see it with the New Age people. I mean, you see it. I'm gonna take a little bit of this.
No one is. Really
I'm gonna take a little bit of that, but I don't want all the stuff that comes with it. I just want the pieces that I like.
Yeah, and some of that is because, so in this country, so kind of yoga has its own thing happening, and then in the New Age community, so much has been really appropriated from indigenous peoples on this land.
Yeah.
And so right, this like, I got my sage, I got my I've got that thing, and that means that I'm spiritual and connected to the earth. Because in this land, the native peoples here are the kind of, right, they were the first peoples here. And we said, oh, like, so this is how you do it, right? I'm disconnected to the earth. Here are these people here are these traditions. And because of colonialism, I can kind of adopt that. Oh, look, I can go to the store, I can buy this thing, right? Or like I can do this workshop. And what's interesting is that there's a big forgetting that happens. And so among all other people, from every other part of the world, you actually have, if you go back long enough, earth-based traditions and practices that your people did to connect with these forces in the ways that you are yearning to now.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I always really encourage people to do, which is why ancestor reverence and worship, while fundamental to Orisha practice, is something that I really encourage people to do, regardless of their faith, is to connect really with where they come from. Because the hole that people are trying to fill really comes from this notion of colonialism, what we have in the United States, like you don't come from anywhere, or where you come from is bad. And so adopt the new thing, adopt whatever you want. Remake yourself, be who you want to be.
Mm-hmm.
And with African heritage people, because we hit this wall of what this institution of slavery did, we don't have the tools, and we've internalized our own, we've internalized white supremacy to say that like Africa itself is like, oh, we can't go back there. Like that's backwards. I mean, I've had Black people from this country ask my elder, like, oh, like, so do people like live in trees?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like these like really,
listen,
to me, these really like
backwards. I had a
backwards.
conversation with a Black minister who denounced Africa. Why would I want to? Why I don't have no connection to those people. A Black minister said this to my face.
Yeah. Right.
Progressive.
So this is the depth, right? This is the depth of ways that we have learned to like, right, why is anything there? Because so much pain is there.
Yeah.
It is demeaned in so many ways, even though it's this repository of wealth in all kinds of ways. Yet we've internalized that there's nothing.
It is the beginning of life. It is the cradle of life.
But it's also like literally where we come from.
Yeah.
And where our personhood, we actually had ways of doing that, and that was beaten out of us, or attempted to be fully beaten out of us. But it really wasn't, but it was attempted to. And so these questions of like this kind of emergence now, I think there's a lot of excitement in it. I mean, it's certainly something that I feel I'm really excited about it. So for example, like, being able to share my practice on Tuesday feels very exciting, is a little, I'm excited and surprised at the outpouring, simply because for myself, so when I came into this practice in the early 90s, like this was not mainstream
Oh no.
at all.
They was like, they
Right?
see you like,
At all.
what kind of devil stuff is he bringing?
Well, and yes, and like, it still happens this today, but like the impact of like, what police do in terms of managing how people practice was more intense then. But this was very much a really intimate practice for me,
Mm-hmm.
and it was really around like my finding my sense of purpose and meaning to be alive, and a way of doing it, and a way of being connected to mystery and to something greater than my understandings of like science and politics and justice and health and well-being. And like there was this wonder that was there. It was like, oh, I can find that. Like that's to me, and this is we all have different purposes. And so for me, that like connection made it worthwhile to really be and embrace life. And so that was the place of my practice. And it was done in community, but there was a learning in community. And at first it was like, no, just like me and nature, like that's good. And then it was like, oh, there's some people and some ways that I can trust who aren't just gonna make assumptions about what is or isn't, or who I am or who I'm not, or try to control how I'm connecting with this wonder and this mystery and this beauty.
Mm-hmm.
And so my hope, and so it's that thread is still alive today. Like this is the place of where it lives in me. And in my journey, based on the training that I've been able to have, that most people, especially in the diaspora, do not get. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But that slowly over time, my practice and my connection to other people and my sharing with other people and consulting with other people has kind of grown.
Mm-hmm.
And this kind of circles have grown, like with me and couple and family. And so to be able to share it in as like public a venue with people who are really not just kind of curious, like, what's that? I wonder what it is, right? This kind of exotic othering and curiosity. But like there's something there and I don't know what it is, and like what can that be?
Yeah.
And so my hope is also that I also really want to share that heart place with people. Like this is where it lives. Like when we're making these offerings and these prayers, if we can connect to that in terms of what our seeking is, then we can actually get the support that we really need. Like if I just go to my friend and I'm like, how you doing? Oh, I'm fine. Right? Then that's how they're going to respond to me.
Yeah.
But if I go to that same friend, how you doing? I'm like, I'm really struggling. Like, I don't even know why, or I feel guilty about it. Right? Then we can get a different kind of support that's relative really to what's happening.
Yeah.
And so that's part of spiritual development, I think, in general, which is important. But like this is the place that this tradition really plays for me, and I just hope that I can kind of share that in its, in its complexity, in a simple way, in its real groundedness in like lineage and tradition, but also in like our personal relationship with these forces, which are in this like sacred river, this sacred mountain. When the storm comes, like in these forces and these energies, that we can kind of find our way with our ancestors, like in our hearts and our lives, and like what healing do we really need and what support do we really need? That's the place of this, and that's what I really hope to be able to share. And it's not for me, like I have things to add, right? I have things to contribute, I have things to tell people, to share, and it's not about me. And even in the sacred literature, there are places in these verses which say, here's the problem. The person was told to do this. They did it. They were happy. They went to their priest and they were like, yay, we praise you. And then in the line it says, and then the priest praises the Orisha, because we recognize that, yes, we get praise because we're people, right? They see us as this, but it's not us doing it. We're this intermediary. We're this conduit. We're this translator in some ways. But like we all have that connection, and we can all develop ways of having our own connection where it doesn't have to be this person tells me yes or no, or good or bad, or right or wrong, or left or right. It's how do I also cultivate my own relationship with these forces? So like, oh, this is the direction I need. And then when I need a little bit more support, then I can, okay, I go to this person. I go to this tradition that can provide a different level of support.
I like that. That's very user friendly.
It's been that way for me. I mean, there's been hardship, there's been rubs, there's been like people's egos, all kinds of stuff is in this tradition also.
As in every
as
other
in every other tradition.
Yes.
And that has also kept me out of a lot of things. It's like, I don't want to get involved in that. I'm not trying to, I'm the and you're the, right? And I'm this storehouse. Like this tradition is so deep. I know so little, relatively speaking. And I also know that there's a lot that I do know that is, that many people have no idea about. And I understand that more because people tell me. Like, it's not something, it's something that like people say like, no, you really know this. And so, for example, for many places in the diaspora, because it's had to survive these institutions of slavery, where it had to be secret and really underground, people could hold on to certain things. And it really required like, so if I'm going to teach you this, I need you to have a level of commitment that you will then be a holder of this. Not just like, yeah, I kind of like it, and I'm going to add this and add that, but like, you're going to hold this. And so there was a weight to that. And in its worst forms, right, there can be a lot of elements of control, right? Because we've all been dealing with some form of harm. And so these issues of like power, kind of managing information can easily kind of fit into that place also. And so sometimes it's like, well, for you to know anything, you need to make this huge commitment. And then I'll teach you this thing. And sometimes that has worked really well. I mean, traditions have been passed on, but sometimes there's a lot of harm that gets in that, just like any other place, right? I'm the holder of this. You need to prove to jump through these hoops for this little bit. And in West Africa, so much, because it's embedded in a culture, the baseline information is so much greater than what has been in the diaspora. Not kind of better, because like we've done what we've done and we've survived and we've held on to certain things, and that's been really powerful. And even had that not happened, I wouldn't have even been able to find my way to my elders who are Yoruba people. They're like, so for example, when I went to Nigeria, I studied with a wood carver for a little bit. I was doing a lot of wood carving, and he was a Christian, but because of where the tradition was when he was younger, he learned Ifa. He learned some of the sacred literature and the Odu and the characters of this religion, just as a part of learning. It was just a part of how you learned. The sacred tradition, the literature held the culture. How we do things, how we live, how we navigate, how we find a spouse, how do we find our purpose, how do we make things. And so he knew that. His son, who was also Christian, because of how the culture was changing, because of colonialism, did not know that. And so there were many people who, not because they were devotees in this religion, this system, knew a lot just because this is how people lived. And so in the diaspora, you didn't have that, right? You had like, I have these 5 things and I'm going to hold these 5 things, and how to do something like ritual is much easier to pass on than like theology and understanding, right? Yeah. And so it's easy. Like I can say like, I'm going to hold these things and I know what they're connected to and I know what they do. And like you prove your worth to me, and then I do this, and then I can show you one of them, and then you prove your worth, and then maybe I'll show you 2. And so that also sets up a dynamic. And what I learned is that there's a lot of information that is just information and is part of sacred literature, but is not, actually doesn't necessarily need, from this traditional lens, the same kind of like holding and vigilance around protecting it. It can really be shared in ways. There are certainly certain things which are like, no, you have to be committed to like see this or to do this, right? You don't have the spiritual authority to do certain things. That's true, but it doesn't mean that they're taboo. So the breadth of what taboo is traditionally is very different from the breadth of what taboo is and has been in the diaspora because of these institutions of slavery and secrecy, the need for secrecy. And so even as certain things are coming out, I'm also really happy to start to, based on what I would learn, to kind of really pass some of that on. Like these are ways that we get to find our way, and do with them what you will. And like, this is a lineage, and this is a practice, and this is a tradition. And so you can learn that. And if you just want to take some of these concepts and have this understanding of like, Black Orisha and divinities and what like African divine love like feels like and looks like and is expressed in that way, beautiful. And you just want to hold that in like a general way, fine. But if you want these other ways and want to deepen like a practice, there is a way to do that. And it's not, you don't have to cobble things together. You don't have to be the one to hold it all. And for me, the other real blessing has been learning how to like find my way that's really relevant and like surrender to a practice. And that's also the dance, because like you don't want to surrender to something or people, right, that are going to be abusive, right? So there's like discerning in there.
And people do.
But life is big and we can't figure it all out and we can't manage it and we do need help. And these forces are bigger than us. And so to find a way for us to trust that, right, as human beings, like for me to find my way, how do I really be there and with an open heart and with, you know, who's behind me, right, with kind of letting go of some of that, like, oh, I can really, this can really, and that's like some of that excitement and like tenderness, and like it's not gentle and easy either, because like, you know, walking the path and like making these choices around like, oh, this is uncomfortable and it's still best for me to do. I need some courage, right? Courage doesn't mean that fear is gone, right? Courage is like, oh, yeah, it's there and you're still walking with that.
Yes. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. Seriously, I tell you,
thank you.
This gives me my I stand in a spiritual space every time you show up. I love it. I do, seriously, from my heart.
It's a real joy. Thank you.
And so
Tuesday,
April
30th.
April 30th.
So the official piece is 6 to 8 at 495 Blake Street at Elm City Montessori School. I'll be leading some simple, like people don't have to bring anything. I'm doing the thing. You don't need to worry about it. 5:30 to 5:50.
Because you know how we do.
Yeah. So really simple. I got it. There's also one other thing I just wanted to pinpoint is there's the Keller Liddell Gallery during Art Walk is having a kind of community conversation.
Yes.
And I believe it's the Thursday. I don't know the date. I wasn't thinking of this. Thursday from 6:30 to 8:30.
On my birthday, May 2nd?
No, the next week. So the 9th.
Okay.
On the 9th.
Oh, I'll be back by then.
Wonderful. So they have a gallery. Their show right now is called 2020.
Yes.
And people are interpreting that however they want. So I and my wife Tegan,
I saw the flyer,
are going to be having a conversation around like healing and liberation, both connected to my work and my practice, but also her work, her practice, and then also our lives together, about what that is, having a conversation around that, and then also encouraging some conversation among the people who come. So
I
that'll
like
also
this.
be happening.
I love seeing this. This is what community is for me. I love it. I don't, you know, I know we love to bring people in from places, but we have so much talent here that is rich.
We do.
And we ought to use it more. We ought to use this talent more. So thank you.
I just looked. Yes, it is Thursday the 9th.
May 9th. So
May 9th.
But people will see it because they'll, you know, they do a good job of
I'm putting a lot on Facebook.
And I love your Facebook piece for Tuesday. That is such a lovely picture.
So I'll tell you quickly what that is. So I was talking about divination, right, and spiritual readings and how we gain this information. So that is a picture of what's called an Opon Ifa, which is a divination tray. And so we use that to get a signature, which then is connected to the sacred literature. So there are 256 signatures or patterns. Each one is called an Odu, O-D-U. And within each Odu, in terms of oral literature, there's like 400 to 800 verses of poetry. Some very short, some very long. And so people just try, priests and priestesses of Ifa, just try to memorize, if that's part of their path, memorize as many as possible. So you go to a spiritual reading, that pattern, that Odu comes up, it's kind of determined, and then you share the messages of that Odu with your client. And you then work out what's relevant, what's not. There are ways to ask other questions to get more information out of that. But that's a part of how we make some of these big decisions and how we kind of stay on the path of our destiny and how we stay healthy physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally. And so it's an assessment tool as well as kind of an intervention.
I like it.
in this tradition.
I may have to have that done.
We can talk about that.
I'd like to have that done. Thank you, Enroue.
Right, thank you
I'll
so
see
much.
you.
Real
We'll make
pleasure.
another date so you can come back
We
on
will.
because I really want to hear how this goes.
Yes.
On the 30th. So
Yes.
thank you for
Because
your
you'll
time.
be away.
I will be away. I will be in the land of romance and light. Romance and lights.
Yes. Wonderful.
So I'll be in Paris and for my birthday. So
Happy birthday, Beth.
dream deferred, no longer deferred. So thank you.
Yes, thank you.
So I'll be in touch.
Okay.
Thank you, Harry.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.